Welcome to Stat Masters, where we teach you how to use Player Profiler to win at fantasy football and better evaluate players. My name is Aaron Stewart, and I'm a senior analyst for Player Profiler. My co-host is Chris Bonagura, a fantasy intelligence network analyst for Player Profiler. Chris, who are we talking about today?
So today we're going to break down one interesting player from the NFC North from each team. But before that, our player revisit of the day is going to be the tight end position in best ball tournaments and best ball and fantasy football in general. You know, every season there's typically one guy drafted in the tight end 8 to tight end 12 range that finishes top 5, not necessarily top 3, but outside of the, mass of tight ends at the end, it's a player that functions really well as a week-to-week fill-in for tight end if you miss on the most elite guys. And I feel like this season that guy is Pat Freiermuth, and it should be obvious, and it's not necessarily close to any other tight end that's outside the top 8 for how much upside there is and how much floor there is. So, the size and speed is fine. And then you look at what he's done in just 2 seasons, tight end 16 and tight end 12 in fantasy points per game in PPR. He's managed, very good target shares, very good receiving yards, pretty much very good in every stat and metric you would want to see for a tight end. 8th overall in ADOT. He earned 12 deep targets, which was number 3 among tight ends. He's also generating yards after the catch with 286 last year, which was number 9. I'm not seeing a Travis Kelce or like a peak Darren Waller, but you're seeing a very good, very functional, high-end tight end player in the NFL. And to be drafted right now as the tight end 10, I believe, on Underdog, we can check. He is the tight end 10 outside of the top 100 by ADP. It's a total miscalculation on fantasy football right now. He's definitely too cheap. And I'm probably going to have my highest exposed tight end be Pat Freiermuth this year. And if he scores a few more touchdowns than last year, he's going to absolutely smash. Aaron, do you have any fun stats for Pat Freiermuth?
Well, you know me. I got to have my fact of the day. And Pat Freiermuth's fact of the day is that Freiermuth played 2 seasons in the NFL, and he is only one of 2 tight ends in NFL history to record 60-plus receptions in each of those first 2 seasons. The other one, it's not Rob Gronkowski. It's not Travis Kelce. It's none of these names you would guess. It's a guy named Keith Jackson. So Pat Freiermuth is in almost a tier of his own. And you mentioned this player page. It's beautiful. It's what we want from tight ends. He's big. Like, the athleticism is good enough. Sure, it's not 90th percentile, but you don't always have to have that. He's just a good tight end. And I think that there's also room for growth as well. Past season finishes tight end 12, but he did that while scoring 2 touchdowns. On top of that, his snap share, it did grow from his rookie season to his second season, but it's still outside the top 20 amongst tight ends. The target share is great, and if he gets on the field more, he could be a 20% target share guy, and that's huge at tight end. And the efficiency is surprisingly high. Like, I don't think a lot of people would equate Pat Freiermuth with being an efficient tight end, but I love that he's top 10 in yards per route run. He was top 10 in yards per team pass attempt, top 10 in dominator rating. We're looking at a good tight end that is approaching that pivotal 3rd year, and he's already been productive, but he hasn't been productive enough to where people have been willing to reach on him in drafts, and that works for us. You can get him in the 9th round, and there's people that are going to let him slip in the 10th round too, because he's not exciting. No one's excited about the Steelers, but that 9th, 10th round is the sweet spot. And last year, you were spot on with Evan Ingram, and this kind of feels like this is the range, right? This is the range you can find that next breakout tight end. There always is a top 5 tight end that goes later in drafts. Why can't it be Pat Freiermuth this season?
Yeah, and people forget, everyone's drumming up all these narratives to hype up Najee Harris, Deontay Johnson, Kenny Pickett, which I'm all for, but all of the positive attributes for the Steelers offense also apply to Pat Freiermuth. He's not excluded from this. And the Steelers offense is very much going to shake down to who gets the most touchdowns, is going to be the most valuable guy you wanted this year in fantasy. Obviously, the running back gets the biggest edge. But Freiermuth is the cheapest relevant skill position player in a consolidated target share team. And at tight end, he doesn't need to break, target share to be a very great fantasy pick. If he can essentially match his 98 targets from last year, but add a couple more touchdowns and maybe like one more big play from an improved team, he's going to be an absolute smash as tight end 10.
Before we move into the NFC North, let's pause for a moment and hear a word from the Podfather.
Let's take a moment to talk about Underdog Fantasy. Now, many of you have already signed up. Thousands have signed up from Player Profiler already over the years. Underdog has supported us since 2020. Much of what you see on Player Profiler is because of Underdog, because of their support. Get the Underdog app, plug in that promo code Underworld. I used to play Underdog just for the best ball drafts. I mean, the best ball drafts are amazing. These draft rooms fill so quickly, and you can win life-changing money. You want to take advantage of all the sleepers we talk about on this show? Well, what better place than in an Underdog draft room to do that? And I recommend taking your Underdog play to the next level by diving into their NFL pick'ems. It's important to correlate those NFL pick'ems. You can pick both the quarterbacks and the wide receivers to exceed expectations, correlate them, and you can 5x your payout. Bada bing, bada boom. Underdog Fantasy, the promo code is Underworld. For an instant deposit match up to $100, Underdog is the truest friend of the Underworld.
Welcome back. Now let us dive into the NFC North, and we are going to start with the Green Bay Packers, who have lost Aaron Rodgers. And let's look at, in particular, their wide receiver, Christian Watson. That's their highest drafted guy. Chris, what do we have with Christian Watson and just this Green Bay Packers offense overall in fantasy football?
Yeah, so Watson is a player I recently revisited. He's been a player that has been tough for me to draft as the wide receiver 39 overall at the 3-4 turn. And previously on this show, we've compared him to Jahan Dotson, showing that their rookie seasons were very similar. And all the reasons to like Watson are reasons to actually like Dotson. And we've been targeting him more. But the more I think about Christian Watson, the more I realize that the last argument, while it certainly still stands for pro Dotson, it's not really enough to say don't draft Christian Watson. So I looked into him more. And when you compare to a guy like A.J. Brown going into his sophomore season, you see a lot of similarities. I think it's fair to cluster Christian Watson into a group of players that I refer to as size speed freaks who depend much more on efficiency flashes than volume to be great for fantasy football. So guys like Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, and now Christian Watson, their fantasy production ebbs and flows as their efficiency goes back and forth. You see this a lot with AJ Brown. So you look at what he's done in his career. As a rookie, you're a rookie. You're obviously going to do less. He earned 84 targets and 1,000 receiving yards, 8 receiving touchdowns, and was wide receiver 30 in fantasy points per game. And then his sophomore season, he didn't necessarily do much better. He earned more targets. He earned 100 targets, and he was on pace for more. He missed 2 games. But what really changed was the touchdowns. He jumped to 11 touchdowns. His yards per reception actually went down, but he ended up as wide receiver 6 in fantasy points per game, thanks to the extra receptions and the extra touchdowns. But then the third season is almost just as good, but drops to 5 touchdowns, drops to wide receiver 24 in points per game. Last season, absolutely crushes targets in a way that's really not his MO, and jumps back up to wide receiver 8. So you see a back and forth, and you see the same back and forth with Deebo Samuel and with DK Metcalf. So can we get the 4th from Christian Watson, or does it stay back? Now, AJ Brown as a rookie earned those 84 targets in 16 games. If you look at his efficiency as a rookie, his target share was 19%. He earned 20 deep targets on 84 total targets. He was number 6 in yards after the catch. And he was top 5 in most of the major efficiency metrics like yards per route run, yards per target, yards per reception. And overall, a very good player. His dominator rating could have been better, but that's because Derrick Henry was getting, basically dominating that offense. You look at Watson. While he only earned the 65 targets, he did it in fewer games, and he played pretty banged up, even in the first half of the season, even when he was healthy. And then you can see that he also suffered a second injury. So he started the season with multiple hamstring injuries that really kept him from being good until his breakout in week 9. But then in week 16, he strained his hip, an injury that definitely slows down wideouts. You look at his game log, it's pretty evident. Week 16, we see the drop. But from week 10 to week 15, as everyone likes to point out, that 5-week stretch was certainly great. So you do see similarities in how they scored as rookies, right? And then we look at the metrics, and the target share is less for sure, but he was healthy for less games. The efficiency metrics are good, but not as good as what A.J. Brown had. A lot of them are at least top 20 in all those same metrics: yards per route run, yards per target, yards per reception. He had the same dominator rating as Brown, this very similar target premium rating. So you do see profiles that are adjacent to each other for sure. So then the question is Christian Watson worth this pick? Can he then do what A.J. Brown did in his second year and improve on touchdowns, improve on overall volume, overall scoring? I don't necessarily see why not. You're certainly still making a bet. There's still a bet that he's not as good as the flashes seemed. But for what you got as a rookie, it's hard to really ask for more. He's definitely expensive. And A.J. Brown was a player coming out of the SEC, where Christian Watson is a small school guy. But after you score 9 total touchdowns as a rookie, small school guy doesn't really matter anymore. I would certainly say where before I was maybe only planning on having a 4 or 5% total exposure on Christian Watson throughout the summer, I'm certainly putting him at what I think is an average of 8 to 9%. I'm not going to go crazy heavily targeting him the way a lot of people suggest you should. But funny enough, A.J. Brown going into his sophomore season was also ADP of 39. It was the exact same cost, a very similar situation, and it worked out for A.J. Brown. But the one caveat to that is that sophomore season for A.J. Brown was the year that Ryan Tannehill threw for 350 fantasy points. The Tennessee Titans won the AFC with an 11-5 record because the Chiefs lost Mahomes for 6 games. Lamar got hurt. That whole division, that whole conference took a step back that year. Everything went right for the Titans, and Ryan Tannehill threw for career efficiency and a very high total touchdown rate by Tennessee's baseline. So Watson might not necessarily bust at this cost, but for him to really blow the cost out of the water, you're banking on a lot of things going right for the Green Bay Packers. Now it could. The NFC is a softer conference. They have a softer division, and Watson certainly doesn't have any stark target competition, but you're certainly making a gamble. So I'm not going to go crazy, but I've removed myself from my anti-Christian Watson position. I've certainly made a change as I've looked further in and gotten more information. Aaron, I know you might be a little bit more tepid on Watson. What's your temperature check? Do you agree or disagree with the case I've presented?
I do ultimately agree with the case there, especially when pulling up A.J. Brown. One of the things we do on StatMasters is we go, have we seen this before? Is it possible to replicate? Seeing A.J. Brown do this as a second-round wide receiver going from his rookie season to his sophomore season, it is encouraging. I think it's fair to still have some doubts with Christian Watson because A.J. Brown is now proven to have this 4-year career where we go, this is one of the best wide receiver talents. And with Watson, it's fair to question, is it sustainable, that stretch that we saw? Can we now see it in a full season? And because of that, I like what you talked about with exposure rate. I actually went and checked my exposure rate on the slow puppy drafts I'm doing. I've got 60 of these drafts. And right now, my exposure rate on Christian Watson is 8%. And I'm happy with that. It's just enough to where if Watson hits, that helps But anything more, I'm a little hesitant, but I have definitely been more willing to draft Christian Watson. One thing that I will mention too is usually what people are going to say with Christian Watson is, oh, that stretch where he scored 7 touchdowns in 4 games, that's unsustainable. I get it. Players aren't going to score that many touchdowns in a 4-game stretch. But I actually had a thread on Twitter back when he was in the middle of this. It was back in November. And what I did is I looked at 3 stats for wide receivers. I looked at yards per route run. I looked at air yards per route run. And I looked at yards after catch per route run. Why do I do that? Because it's been able to help me find some gems in the past. When Debo, way before his breakout, that's what sold me on Debo, was seeing how efficient per routes run that he was. And I was like, this guy is different. For him specifically, it was yards after catch. It was that weird season where he had less than 400 receiving yards, but all but 2 of the receiving yards were yards after catch. And I mention that because Christian Watson had this, he was in excellent company last year. There was, at that point of the season, only 5 wide receivers that were top 12 in all 3 of those. Again, that's yards per route run, air yards per route run, and yards after catch per route run. And 3 of those guys were top 10 in fantasy points per game. Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, and hey, A.J. Brown, right? So 3 of those 5 guys were elite guys. One of the other 2 guys was Christian Watson. So that price, the ADP, isn't as horrendous as my initial reaction to it. Really, when I step back on it and go, yes, this Packers offense may be a little messy this year, but honestly, no matter what, if it's worst case or best case scenario, Watson should be involved. And Watson has shown it's not just the touchdowns. He is super efficient. That number 1 in target premium is huge. So with Christian Watson, yes, have some exposure on him. I've softened my stance on him. You're going to want some Christian Watson. Maybe don't go overweight on him, but still, that 8% that I currently have, I'm very happy with.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of upside here that we were overlooking before. We had Spy in the comments saying, asking us where our hatred went. That's why he tunes in for the show, is our unadulterated hatred for certain players. But you have to always doubt yourself. And I think on this one, we weren't seeing the full picture. Still 1,000% draft Jahan Dotson. If anything, now liking Watson makes Dotson look even better. But they're both good. I think it's just a matter where they're both good. But moving on to Minnesota, I want to talk about Jordan Addison. I feel like that's the hottest name right now because it's the biggest unknown. We all know what Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, Kirk Cousins, and Alexander Mattison are, or at least the majority of us. Jordan Addison is the one that really gets people excited because he is an unknown. And we look at what Adam Thielen did last year. So we should pull up Adam Thielen. And everyone's ready to just slot Addison in to what Adam Thielen did in the last couple of years and call it a day and just love him. Now, Thielen had 170 targets, 70 receptions, but more so people are very interested in the 621 routes he ran, number 2 among all receivers. And his 92.7% route participation, his 22 red zone targets. Adam Thielen was on the field and being incorporated on every single play, at least when they were passing it. Now, he didn't quite earn what he normally earned career-wise. Well, he did target-wise. He didn't have the touchdowns, something that Aaron had touched on when we spoke last week. And everyone's ready to just slot in Jordan Addison for this work, which I think is more or less reasonable. From all the information we have from the pre-draft process, Matt Harmon's reception perception, and the NFL industrial complex, it's fair to assume Jordan Addison is good at football. If he's a bust, he's a bust, but you got to have a process. And by the process, he seems good, even with the 173-pound frame. So does he walk in and pay off his current ADP which is fairly expensive. You're not getting a discount because, we get sharper every year, and fantasy players love players that look good on a spreadsheet, and Jordan Addison does. He's wide receiver 36 on Underdog right now with an ADP of 71.3. He goes right at the 6-7 turn, but I almost never see him fall into the 7th round anymore. He's very much an end of 6th round pick, and he's only going up. And the only issue I have with that is, Thielen last year got the 100 targets, the 716 receiving yards, but only 6 receiving touchdowns. And he was number 41 in PPR points per game. And that's probably even lower in half PPR because it's not a lot of touchdowns. For Jordan Addison to really pay off that price, he's going to have to far exceed what Thielen did. And yes, Adam Thielen is super old, and that's a very dusty number for him. But, that stat line for any rookie, that's an impressive stat line for a rookie. 107 targets, 70 receptions, 716 receiving yards, 1,000 air yards, and 6 touchdowns. And that's going to be good for just about where he's getting drafted. I love Jordan Addison, but people are going crazy. They're overexposed to him. A lot needs to go in Addison's favor for him to really blow away that cost. And in that range, you want players that are going to blow away that cost. We talked about Michael Pittman last week. You have the same case for Mike Evans, right? Jahan Dotson, who we just brought up. All 3 of these guys offer a much higher ceiling case based on what we can project today than Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison is going to need to run unbelievably hot on touchdowns and likely see an injury to either Hockenson or Jefferson. At most, what you're getting out of Addison is a playoff run where he's really good in playoffs because rookies get better later in the season. But that's very expensive for a guy that is small and still unknown. We're all just treating him like he's already Devontae Smith. That's a dangerous way to go. And I would love to have him in like the 8th round or the late 7th round. Like Quentin Johnston goes around later and Zay Flowers goes 2 rounds later, and they offer the same upside case. So I'm not out on Jordan Addison, but I'm pumping the brakes. Aaron, let me hear it.
So another thing, too, that we need to address with Jordan Addison, I don't think he's bad or anything, but the thing that I would remind people is the context of last season. Mid-season, the Vikings traded for TJ Hockenson, and specifically, it would be their Week 9 game against the Washington Commanders. And when I mention that is on the season, Thielen played 17 games, had 107 targets. If you do the math there, that is about 6.2, 6.3 targets per game. Now, he played 7 games before Hockenson was traded. He got a nice even 50 targets. 50 targets in 7 games, that comes out to about 7 targets per game, a little bit more than 7 per game. But he had 57 targets the rest of the season in 10 games. 57 divided by 10, that's down to 5.7. That's a significant drop, right? Because we need to remind ourselves too, is that when you're drafting Jordan Addison, currently where he's going in best ball, he is the 3rd option in this passing game. Hockenson had double-digit targets in plenty of games. He had a 16-target game with the Vikings. The Vikings really like TJ Hockenson, along with, of course, Justin Jefferson being the target leader there. So when you're looking at some of the receivers that are going around that similar ADP, Mike Evans, there's about a 3 to 4 ADP difference there. I kind of view that as like a different tier. But when you're staring at Jordan Addison, it's, for me, almost impossible to take him over the upside of Kadarius Toney, potentially being that number 1 receiver and very least number 2 target option in a Chiefs offense. Jahan Dotson, who we personally believe can give Terry McLaurin a run for his money of being the 1A option. We at least view Jahan Dotson as being a very strong 1B option in his offense. Even Gabe Davis, who is still the number 2 wide receiver in a Buffalo Bills offense, you start to see where, like with Addison, it's fine to draft, but it's, for me personally, hard to pull the trigger when I'm like, man, these other receivers, I feel I can get just as much volume, and some of these guys are in better offenses. with Addison, I don't think it's plug and play, as he mentioned, of going, oh, here's 100 plus targets from Adam Thielen that we're just going to push to Jordan Addison. He may not exceed 100 targets his rookie season on the Vikings.
Yeah, I would say like a 5% exposure. I agree with all those guys that you named, Aaron, and we've been very spoiled with rookie receivers in years past. But when does this ever work in gambling of any sort? Right, we see a trend the last couple of years, very talented receivers exceeding their ADP, helping you in fantasy football. Now this year we put them all so high up, rookies and sophomores, that the price is uncomfortable. It's obviously the year it all comes crashing down. And keep in mind, Jahmyr Chase was an 8th round pick as a rookie, and he had T. Higgins on that team. So if you're telling me Jordan Addison is worth 2 rounds more than Jahmyr Chase as a rookie, you're just a liar. But we'll move on. I don't have to insult hypothetical people that didn't even interact with me. We'll move on to, let's say, the Detroit Lions. Apparently everyone's new favorite team. And we're going to talk about another rookie, Jahmyr Gibbs. I know we don't typically talk about as much rookies on this show, I guess. I'm not really here to overanalyze rookies. They kind of are what they are. Gibbs, I want to talk about in a similar but opposite sense of Addison. So what we're doing with Gibbs is similar to what we're doing with Addison, propping a player up based on a projection of a different player that was on a team that is projected to be very similar to what we saw last year. So the projection itself is essentially rather sticky. Jahmyr Gibbs is RB13, taken at that 3-4 turn, but I'm much more comfortable taking Jahmyr Gibbs, and I would even endorse taking Jahmyr Gibbs, even though I fully acknowledge it is too expensive. Jahmyr Gibbs should probably go a round later, maybe a round and like a half, but you take him where you can get him, because rookie running backs and rookie receivers, but more so running backs, really do run hot later in the season. Gibbs is walking into a potentially very large target share. And in the final weeks of the season, Detroit is playing potential shootout games, potentially fighting for a playoff spot, especially week 17 against Dallas, especially with week 17 game stacking. It's fairly easy to get a CeeDee Lamb, Jahmyr Gibbs. We look at what DeAndre Swift has done, because the assumption is he walks into DeAndre Swift's role with David Montgomery taking on an early down role. And DeAndre Swift last season received 70 targets and, was 19th in route participation among running backs and 6th in target share. You go back previous years, 78 targets the year prior, 2nd in target share, 297 routes run. It's a heavy receiving role. Even as a rookie, 57 targets, 211 routes run, numbered 10th in target share. That's as a rookie. And the Lions have already told us that they think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be a much better rookie than DeAndre Swift was, that they potentially think he's just, as a rookie, going to be a better player than DeAndre Swift ever was or will be, that he's potentially their Alvin Kamara. Now, if we want to look at something like best ball points added, which we were on Stack Hunters just yesterday with Bradley Stalter, and he was talking about how best ball points added is actually year to year a very sticky stat. You can see that DeAndre Swift last season was number 21 in best ball points added. The year prior, he was number 12. And the year prior to that, he was number 15. Now, it is also an endorsement of DeAndre Swift. This is a talented player, don't get me wrong, but we're not talking about Swift. DeAndre Swift's role has an RB2 floor. So you're certainly getting Gibbs higher to his ceiling, but understand what you're getting when you draft Jahmyr Gibbs. It's much less likely he's a stud from start to finish. He probably doesn't even finish as a top 10 running back in total points. It's possible he just comes out and is Alvin Kamara out of the gate. But they have David Montgomery, who gives them a reason to not play Gibbs if there's any facet of the game they feel he's not fully ready for. And a lot of the time, that just comes down to playbook. There might just be formations and packages they feel in September Montgomery has a better grasp of, so Gibbs isn't there. But if Gibbs is as talented as his profile suggests he is, he has genuine league and tournament winning upside down the stretch. And that's what's worth the overprice. With Jordan Addison, you're not getting as high of league winning upside. Jahmyr Gibbs could absolutely crush the month of December. Now, I'm not overdrafting him because it is an overpay as RB13. You're putting a little too much hype into the role. He should be closer to RB20, maybe just after Aaron Jones. But I'm willing to do it that 7 to 9% of the time. That I'm also going to draft Christian Watson because the upside case is there and it's evident. But there is a downside case, and you have to respect both. Aaron, are you leaning up or down on Jahmyr Gibbs?
Surprisingly, I'm leaning more into Jahmyr Gibbs, but I'm also starting to see a trend of Gibbs actually slipping in drafts. I believe we've actually gotten to that point of his ADP where collectively people are going, ooh, I don't know about that price. I've been able to snag him at the end of the fourth round in drafts. And a lot of times the teams that do draft him, it is focusing on this week 17 thing that we always do. People always go Bengals, Chiefs, but there's also Cowboys, Lions. So you mentioned CeeDee Lamb and come back with Gibbs, but I've also got like Pollard and Gibbs because, hey, that late in the season, I do agree that sometimes these talented rookies, you got to get through that first half of the season. It can be a little rough where you sit there and go, I can't believe I've invested a fourth round pick in this guy. But there is upside that can come up that second half of the season after a bye week. A lot of times with the talented rookies, it just clicks and it becomes a cheat code. I've embraced that volatility as I've tried to do more of this game theory, I guess more of a DFS approach to it. But yeah, like when you're drafting Gibbs, you know that the risk is there is another talented running back that he's competing with David Montgomery. And because of that, you can't just auto select Jahmyr Gibbs. But in mentioning Swift too, we've talked about Swift on a previous episode of, hey, he's going to Philadelphia and the Eagles aren't as likely to pass to Swift as the Lions were. Nothing against Swift. It's just that's not what Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offense has done.
We're talking about Jahmyr Gibbs, dude.
Right. And tying it back into Gibbs, we know he's a talented pass catcher. And so having all this receiving workload, I think can be expected. And that's why you can't fade him, even if it seems kind of disgusting in the fourth round initially. It's going, hey, we knew that Swift last year with the Lions was going to get a lot of receiving work, and we pushed him all the way to the top of the second round. You're kind of getting the discounted version of that with the same risk. So for that reason, I'm more on board with Gibbs this year than I originally thought I would. I think my exposure is right above 10%. It probably isn't going to go any higher. I've been pivoting, but the only reason I'd add more of them is just if he does fall, and if you're listening to this, he does. He'll fall like 6 picks at least. I've seen him fall double-digit picks.
He definitely slides. I've seen Gibbs, and I've also seen Watson fall to the 4-5 turn. And if you can ever get them there, I would just draft them. Even if you feel like you've already taken too many of either player, like you're listening to this, and you're like, oh my God, I have 22% Jahmyr Gibbs. Maybe I should slow it down. But then you see him there at like the 4-11. Just take him. That's a great pick. And Aaron, I'm glad you warned everyone that we might be a little surprised that after 17 shows of us agreeing on quite literally everything that you were going to agree with me on Gibbs. I appreciate you warning us, dude, because that blew me away. I had no idea you were going to agree with me, dude.
It just had to add some suspense here, but it's tough. You and I, a lot of times we're looking at the same things there, and usually we're in unison before we even talk on it. But from Gibbs and the Detroit Lions, we got one more team in the NFC North. We've got the Chicago Bears, who have added a favorite of Player Profiler, Mr. DJ Moore, to their team. Chris, what can you tell me about like DJ Moore going to the Bears? He's a very divisive player amongst fantasy football analysts. Are you pro or against DJ Moore in best ball?
There's a lot of skeptics on DJ Moore and this Bears offense because of projected passing volume. You know, we look at Moore right now, and he is wide receiver 26. He's a 4-5 turn player. He does slip into the 5th round. DJ Moore is one of the first players we ever talked about on the show where the moral of what we came out to was, hey, like you look at just the last 4 years in PPR points per game finishes, number 14, number 28, number 23, and number 33. That's essentially his floor and ceiling right there, right? High-end wide receiver 2 to low-end wide receiver 2. He's being priced closer to his floor. I don't care about what you project passing volume to be. I don't care about your assumption of Justin Fields' quarterback play. DJ Moore has played with some of the worst quarterbacks for the last 5 years. The one good quarterback he had in Cam Newton, he was playing with a shell of Cam Newton and then a gaggle of backups and bridge quarterbacks, quite literally Teddy Bridgewater and Kyle Allen. So, give the man a break for anything you might have not seen, but also let's applaud the man for everything you have seen. Even last season when he was wide receiver 33 in points per game, not even great, right? He had a 27% target share, number 2 in snap share, didn't necessarily run a ton of routes, but they didn't call a lot of pass plays. And you know this because he was number 11 in route participation. So when they did call pass plays, he's going. He led the league in air yards share. He didn't have a great yards after the catch season, but if you look at past seasons, we know he's a great yards after the catch player. He didn't have a great success rate versus man last season, but again, you go through the last seasons and it goes back and forth. Efficiency metrics are great to look at. They're a great starting off point. But for a player with a 4 or 5 year career where you see it going back and forth, years of good, years of bad, right? He was number 5 in dominator rating last season, but there's also seasons where he wasn't. That one year where Robbie Anderson took over. When you see oscillation like that, it tells you that you have a good but not elite player, right? DJ Moore is not Justin Jefferson or Jahmyr Chase, but he's not some scrub that people are trying to paint him to be. If we look at team numbers for the Bears from last season, advanced stats, and mind you, September was awful. This was like a rock bottom team for 6 weeks. Justin Fields only threw it 318 times. That's like a historically low number for a team to pass it in the modern NFL era. He's obviously going to throw the ball more. Now, probably not a ton more, but he'll get to around 400 pass attempts. And if DJ Moore can earn 25 to 30% of that, he can still earn 130 targets. The key here is not necessarily volume, but efficiency, right? You want to look at a guy like Lamar Jackson, who now we're going to make a comp for Justin Fields, right? Lamar, you look at his stats. Lamar never throws for over 3,000 yards. He did it once, but he's very efficient with throwing touchdowns. He's very efficient with completion percentage, and he still makes usable fantasy players. Marquise Brown was a high-end wide receiver 2 for multiple years, and Mark Andrews has been a league-winning tight end because the targets consolidate. And when you're mobile and you have the effect of mobility on a defense, you can hone in on 1 or 2 guys. So the way that the Ravens give you, their 1 or 2 guys is Mark Andrews, and it was also Hollywood, right? You look at other pass-first teams, even Jalen Hurts didn't quite throw 4,000 yards last year. I could be wrong. I know Josh Allen always throws a ton of yards, but Hurts last season, he did throw 4,000. But let's say the year before that, he only threw 3,100 on 430 pass attempts and a 61% completion percentage. You still had Devontae Smith, right? You still had Dallas Goedert. You still had players get it done. So to think that DJ Moore isn't going to be an absolute alpha on what's an improving Bears team, and he's not at least a safe bet at wide receiver 26 is kind of crazy. If anything, and then people will go and tout Darnell Mooney, right? Oh, like let's draft the peripheral guys. Just don't draft Mooney, don't draft Kmet, don't draft Chase Claypool. Draft DJ Moore. Like if you're going to draft any of these guys, just take the best one on what projects to be a low volume passing offense, who's not even overpriced based on his pure talent. This is one of the cheapest I've ever seen DJ Moore in redraft. And this is arguably his best quarterback he's had. Aaron, let's hear it.
DJ Moore has been one of my favorite players since day one. And he's broken my heart time and time again because I've always overdrafted him. But this year, I'm with you. Like the cost is ridiculously low. Wide receiver 26 overall. We actually, this might have been months ago. We talked about DJ Moore. When we talked about him at that time, he was going inside the top 20 receivers. And we said, hey, if he slides a few more spots, like you've got to draft him. He's good. It feels weird to draft him as top 20. But now, wide receiver 26, and we know what the floor, we know what the upside is. It's beautiful. I've taken him 7 drafts of the 60 drafts that I've done on this slow draft. And 4 of those times I've taken him in the 5th round. And here's a little cheat code too. For those teams that start with Jahmyr Chase, there's a good chance DJ Moore is available in your 4th round. And there's even a chance that Joe Burrow and Justin Fields slide, because depending on people's roster construction, they may not want to draft those quarterbacks in the 4th round. And I've had this funny little trick. It's perfect, where I'm sitting there looking at Joe Burrow and Justin Fields and DJ Moore on a team that I've drafted Jahmyr Chase. I draft DJ Moore, leaving both those QBs there, and I just tell the person who's drafting after me, who's got back-to-back picks, I say, you select my quarterback for me. I'm either going to get to stack DJ Moore and Justin Fields, or you're going to allow me to stack Joe Burrow and Jahmyr Chase, and it's beautiful. There's no wrong answers. Like, this is the next level of like roster construction, game theory for best ball, but with DJ Moore in his profile too. He's never really had anyone to throw the ball to him, but the efficiency metrics point to a guy that is good. And if Justin Fields can take that next step, this is an overplayed comparison that I don't agree with, right? But people always go, look what happened to Jalen Hurts when he got A.J. Brown. Look at what happened when Josh Allen got Stephon Diggs. Well, DJ Moore's profile at least points towards a guy that is a talented alpha receiver. On the efficiency metrics, the yards per route run, and this was a down season for Moore, it was still wide receiver 28. He still hit over 2 yards per route run, and that's a good benchmark that I personally look at for yards per route run. And his yards per team pass attempt was number 18, like top 20. That's good. Dominator rating, that was number 5 amongst all wide receivers. Of course, led Carolina last year with a 48% air yard share, which was number 1. But you can look at any of these efficiency metrics throughout his career. He's always been one of the best guys. And best ball points added, I like to look at best ball points added per game, which you can see on player pages there. That's the number that's in parentheses. Over 5 points per game. That ranks pretty good for DJ Moore. It ranks really well for him. I like that. DJ Moore helps you in best ball, and you're now getting him at the cheapest he's been in years. And he's talented. He's good. He's never slipped. He now has the best quarterback play of his career. I'm ready for it. Thanks for joining us on Stat Masters, your go-to for fantasy football insights. From player analysis to breakdowns, we've empowered you to dominate your leagues. Stay subscribed for cutting-edge analysis to keep you ahead of the competition. Keep the conversation going, stay passionate, focused, and victorious. This is Stat Masters signing off.
Hey, you like that video? Be sure to subscribe and activate those alerts so you get notified as soon as new videos drop. And be sure to check out playerprofiler.com. We have all the tools for you to dominate every type of fantasy league. We have a draft kit, Dynasty Deluxe, data analysis, DFS Dominator, and don't forget the player rankings to rule them all.